Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Governor and legislature issue competing congressional redistricting maps. What's causing the teacher shortage at MCPS? Who are the nominees seeking to fill MCPS school board vacancy? And why is the Cherry Blossom Festival being in person next year so important to this region? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member and founder of SkillSmart, a technology company, Mike Knapp, and secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, as required by Maryland law, submitted new congressional and state legislative maps to the General Assembly last Friday on November 5th. The following Monday, the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission, created by the General Assembly, released 4 draft concepts of its own for congressional maps for public comment. As noted in the Baltimore Sun, Maryland's congressional map has repeatedly been criticized and challenged in court for benefiting unfairly Democrats in a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. Democrats hold a 7-1 advantage over the GOP in the state 8 U.S. House seats. Mike, the General Assembly will meet in December in a special session to finalize the map. What's the likely outcome? We saw a lot of litigation over the last iteration of the maps, and if you look at the old map, it's very tortured the way the districts were drawn. Are we going to see something similar?
Probably yes and yes. I think we'll likely see a lot more litigation, and I think that we'll continue to see the gerrymandering that we've seen in the past, which I think is unfortunate. And unfortunately, we continue to see it in other states doing the exact same thing. So whether it's Texas or North Carolina or Maryland, depending upon which side of the line you are, if you're an R or a D, you're going to take the opportunity to draw the lines in your favor, which is the excuse everybody uses to do it because everybody else is doing it. And I think that becomes really problematic. At some point, we have a couple states that have actually put this to commissions that have been bipartisan and have come up with something that is much more standardized, much more uniform, keeps communities together, actually looks like a map that most of us would look at and say, oh, okay, I understand why I'm voting here, as opposed to having lines that cut across an entire state. And I'm hopeful that we can get to that point, but in the conversations I've had with folks, I think litigation is going to be the word of the day by the end as we move through this process.
You know, Mike, I love using this example. I had to give a speech up in Carroll County to the Republican Central Committee there a couple of years ago. And I mentioned that Jamie Raskin was my congressman, and they responded that he's their congressman as well. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that Silver Spring Tacoma Park has any relationship to Carroll County seems absurd.
Congressman Trone is living in Potomac and representing Hagerstown and Washington County. Well, you got to sit there and scratch your head and go, I don't understand.
Trone is sitting on his throne at the liquor store, I guess. Anyway, Mark, all reports are the General Assembly will target Congressman Andy Harris for defeat by adjusting his district boundaries to include more liberal precincts in Anne Arundel County. Is Harris a dead man walking?
Well, I don't know about dead men. I mean, it's certainly, if you know District 1, it's a very conservative area. So it will be moved up to a D, whatever the number is, a more Democratic leaning one. I just think there's always, we assume a lot about redistricting and gerrymandering, but it's also important to remember that during wave elections, there's a tendency for some of these assumptions to be kind of blown past, and people get elected sort of beyond what the numbers are. And I'd point, we just mentioned David Trone. After November's election, the National Republican Congressional Campaign Committee added District 6 as one of their targets. And as you mentioned, it's in one of those areas that's got some very, very Republican, very conservative areas tied in with Montgomery County. So there can be a, how shall I say, a phenomena of being overly aggressive in redistricting and coming back and finding yourself surprised. So we may see ourselves with 2 Republicans rather than 0.
Well, do you have a candidate? Who's your candidate? I mean, doesn't it fundamentally come down?
In District 6, I think Neil Parrott is head and shoulders ahead of the other candidates. So yes, in 6, without question, I think.
And Neil's a current delegate, is that?
He's a current delegate, yes.
So he's had experience. I mean, I think.
And over the years, he's actually spent a lot of time in Montgomery County and is very familiar with the area. So.
I think David Trone has done a good job, and I think he's been pretty formidable. I mean, I still question. I think when you have a district drawn like that, it does beg the question, and I think it certainly does look like an opportunity from someone from the other party, because you sit there and go, how do these pieces come together? How do we get downtown Potomac to look like Hagerstown? And it doesn't make any sense. And so yeah. I think it also I'll be curious to see. I think there's an allure. I think there's a bit of a siren song that you hear because people look at this and go, well, of course this is gettable. I think David's done a good job. And I think his struck a reasonable tone that reflects kind of the moderation of that district. But I think it still calls into question why we have a district that looks like that in the first place.
Well, I mean, his isn't the worst.
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, Sarbanes district was far crazier than David Trone's.
We said it at the outset, but it's worth noting that while the federal courts have deferred to the states on districting, there are state provisions that can be challenged in the Maryland courts. That's really where the main judicial combat is going to be over these districts. And the creation of the Hogan, the commission that's had hearings, that's solicited input, provides, I think, a very positive, good alternative that the courts can look at. So they don't have to do the line drawing themselves. But
before we leave, Mike, the legislative process is this. The General Assembly, as I understand it, has to vote on the district or the maps. And then that recommendation, of course, is subject to veto by the governor. And of course, the current General Assembly is kind of veto proof. So is that the process?
That as I understand it, and that's the process. So stay tuned, and hope springs eternal. I'd like to think that we could actually get a bipartisan approach and actually get something that looks more rational.
Well, rational aside, let's talk about a good news story for a change. We concentrate a lot on the negative. One of the industries hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic in this area has been the hospitality industry. In May of 2020, WTOP radio described the DC tourism industry as being decimated and called it a wreck. And frankly, hundreds of millions of dollars have been lost and thousands of people have seen their jobs disappear. Mark, nearly 2 years into the process, there may be signs that tourism, which was the lifeblood of the hospitality industry, is poised to return in the spring of 2022 with the announcement that the Cherry Blossom Festival will be in person and not a virtual event as it was held last year. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that's good news. Actually, one of the drivers for the return in tourism was the reopening of the Smithsonian institutions. Tourists generally were coming back sooner than business travel. Business travel is very much a problem now. But tourists needed some place to go in Washington, D.C., and having the Smithsonian available was important to see some improvement. But as you mentioned, we still have a very, very long way to go.
Well, I know a lobbyist who works for a company down south, and this fall was the first time that she has been to Washington to meet with congressional people in over a year and a half. So these are small signs that maybe the crocus are starting to bloom. And Mike, as I said earlier, I have several clients in the hotel industry, and they have had a really hard time. They've had to claw and scrape to keep from losing their properties. I mean, the fact that the Wardman Park has been shut down, and that, I mean, that's 8% of the available rooms in the city. Are we looking at the end of the COVID-19 emergencies?
I don't know if we're looking at the end. I'd love to be able to predict the future, but I think that what I've noticed in the travels I've had is I think the hospitality industry has recognized the challenges, has come up with techniques to be able to adequately provide for people's safety in a way that people are willing to and to engage. I mean, I've had the opportunity to go to a number of hotels and fly, and I think the hospitality industry has done a great job of being able to create safe spaces, to create distances, to have masks, to have sanitizers, and it has set up. I just been very impressed, and I think the industry has been very agile. And I think if they continue to do that, you're going to continue to see travel, whether you're going to see spikes of COVID or not. I think they're in a position to be able to respect and to respond appropriately. And I think their next challenge is going to be, how do they compensate people to make sure they've got good staffing to provide the service that they want to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we need the convention and tourist business to come back to town to help out the regional economy. When we come back from this short break, why is the teacher union warning of MCPS teacher resignations? Stay tuned. Welcome back. When MCPS returned to in-person learning this fall, a great sigh of relief was heard throughout the county. But now Jennifer Martin, president of the Montgomery County Education Association, is warning that there is a hidden crisis that may cause teachers to resign from the school system entirely. Mike, according to Ms. Martin, there are 300 teaching vacancies in the system and not enough substitutes to fill the void, producing teacher burnout and other dissatisfactions. So are there policy reasons for this, or are there practical reasons for this? Why are we having a shortage of teachers when the salary for teachers is pretty good? So what's causing this overall dissatisfaction?
I think it's similar to the dissatisfaction you're seeing in many industries. I think there is a level of burnout. I think teachers spent the last year and a half trying to teach in a virtual environment, which I think was amazingly stressful for them to be doing that at home while trying to also care for their families. There wasn't really a break between when that ended and then jumping into a classroom, which created a new set of challenges in that what's safe, what's not safe, who's vaccinated, what's not vaccinated. I just think so I think the last 2 years have created just an amazing set of challenges personally for many in the teaching profession. And I think what you're seeing in Montgomery County is not unique to Montgomery County. I've seen a number of school districts that are actually taking off the entire week of Thanksgiving in an effort to give their teachers a break and a respite there in between, just to take a breather. And so I think you're seeing a lot of challenges, and it's not just unique to teaching. We're seeing the same thing in healthcare. We're seeing the same thing in hospitality. And so how do we recognize the new normal and begin to put the two pieces in place to help people, to help accommodate and get over the hump of where we need to get to, so we can.
But Mike, you're not addressing the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is vaccinations. And there are a lot of people who are choosing to leave their professions over having to be vaccine mandates. I mean, that has to be factored in.
I think that's some of the elephant in the room, but I mean, it's interesting. We brought people back to campuses for Montgomery College, and we're at a 97% vaccination rate for those people who are back. I mean, and it was a mandate that you had to be vaccinated to come back. I think we have 50 people who have requested religious or other exemptions. And so I mean, I'm not seeing that. I think there are some numbers in some places where that's a challenge, but I don't think it's the case that here in Montgomery County and quite honestly in a lot of other places. I think there are some places in the country where it's an issue, and you're seeing 30% vaccination rate, and you're seeing hospitalizations increase commensurate with that show that. But I don't see that here as much.
Well,
I would argue that, I mean, what we're seeing beyond the industries we just described is sort of the pandemic has morphed into the sort of the great resignation private sector across the board are experiencing. And I don't know that it's all vaccination related. Some of it is other organization, it's relocation. People because of COVID were relocated, and now they're going to find a day job, a job that's more located where they are. So there's been kind of a reshuffle that's going on because of that. Certainly the spike of inflation means that people are looking to get paid more, and employers are paying more because they need employees. So there's a lot of turnover that's taking place. Again, vaccination may be a factor, but I think it's not even the leading one.
No, I think there are a lot of moving parts out there. Early care and education, so trying to find childcare. I mean, that's still a real challenge for a lot of people, and all of those. So, I mean, to try and ascribe it to a single set of circumstances, I think is really difficult. I think.
Well, I'm not suggesting that, but I think it's definitely a factor.
It's certainly a factor, but I don't think it's a contributing. It's a significant one.
I think it's more of a factor than burnout, frankly, because I mean, I think with the fact that we have 300 vacancies is emblematic of the fact that people don't want to be vaccinated.
Oh, I don't think that's a reflection. And I'm sure there are some in there that's the case, but I think there are a lot of people who've just been forced to rethink whether or not they can make this work with their family situation. I think that's as much of anything, or just being able to teach in this new environment and feel comfortable doing it.
That would be true in other areas, but with Montgomery County's vaccination rate above, I guess, 85 plus, or, I think we should be able to pick and choose. I think we've got other problems.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, one place where there aren't, enough vacancies is on the school board, because 18 applicants have filed for the vacancy on the Montgomery County Board of Education, which was created when longtime board member Pat O'Neill passed away this past September. Ms. O'Neill served on the board for over 20 years and was a mainstay and chaired the board during many of those occasions. Mark, there are many fine candidates who volunteered for the District 3 seat, some of whom ran for the school board in the last election. One of them is our very own 21 This Week panelist, Lori Halverson, who served on the State Board of Education in 2016 and 17. So how is this decision going to be made?
Well, it's made by the school board, so they will be sort of picking their new colleague. And that's the process. It's actually, the way the law has been for a while.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of impressive candidates.
Sure.
Anil Chowdhury is one. Ana Sol Gutierrez is another. Lori, of course, is one. There are quite a few candidates. I hope they do a vetting process. But Mike, we saw this over in Loudoun County, where education became a fulcrum for the election that was being held, and the focus was on the decisions that the Board of Education was making. So, as important as the school board is, shouldn't the voters of Montgomery County determine who's going to fill this position and not have it be filled by the organization itself?
I mean, typically, I would say that's yes, and they'll get that opportunity. The challenge you have is, and we had this when I was president of the county council when Marilyn Praisner passed away. You have a time when you actually need to get someone back in to represent that person, and to actually put on and duly run an election and try to get participation in that election in a time frame that allows you to then fill the seat for representation becomes a real challenge. And so I think, especially if you look at the Board of Education, on the one hand, you'd say that'd be great. On the other hand, if you look at the turnout and you look at the voter percentages that vote in the Board of Education, you probably would get very, 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 very low turnout, and you wouldn't get very much participation, and it would take a lot longer to fill the seat, and it would cost a lot of money, as opposed to doing it now and then being able to follow up with the next election. The challenge that happens here is, because of the timing of this, it's going to look like it's a little odd, because you've got an election that's coming up, and couldn't we just roll this into that? But you have rules and laws in place to already govern how this happens. It just happens to be kind of the serendipity of the timing that makes that look odd. And so that's the challenge with this one. And so you can't really go back and kind of change the law to conform to the 6 months when this happened to happen this time, because you've got to have a process in place that recognizes that doesn't happen the other 95% of the time.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. All the way around that one. Perfect.
Yeah, you circled the wagons there, but I mean, I still think that the voters should have an opportunity to.
And they will.
And they will, yeah.
And they will. And I think that's an important point.
And I think you described it, that voters are putting a lot more attention on school board elections. The heat has been moved up immeasurably, not just in Virginia, but in Maryland as well. So they're paying close attention.
In light of that, I'm impressed that there were 18 people who actually put their name in the ring. I mean, if you look at what's happening to the board members in Loudoun County, where they're having recall votes and people are resigning, I mean, I think they're going to have a really hard time trying to find people to run when you look at Loudoun County for the next election. And so I think that there are 18 people who are willing to kind of put their hat in the ring for a job that's not particularly well compensated, that puts them in the frying pan most of the time. I'm impressed. I'm not sure I'd put my name in the ring for that.
Well, I mean, there's all motivations. I mean, obviously, if whomever is selected will be running as an incumbent in the next election, and that does speak to their ability to be reelected. And I just think that when you look at the number of people and some of the qualifications of people, again, I said Ana Sol Gutierrez, who was a delegate for a long time,
and was a board member, and was a member of the board,
and a former board member, and who also run for county executive. I mean, you've got quality people running, so it's not because they're faint-hearted. So. In any event, we're going to have to take a wrap. We're going to stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mike Knapp.
Thanks, Casey. I just want to give a shout out to community impact, collective impact. This past week, the county council introduced unanimously legislation to put in place a public-private partnership to govern early care and education in Montgomery County in an effort to recognize that early care and education is both critical for the formation of our youth and making sure that our students are well equipped to be able to move into school, but also to bring together, it's not just government providing service, but we've got to have all of the folks at the table. We've got to have the public sector, the private sector, and everyone engaged in that. And we're taking steps to make that a reality. And so kudos to the council and kudos to Montgomery moving forward for that.
Thank you, Mike. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
What Montgomery County looks like for the next several decades is on the table. It's part of the planning plan, Thrive Montgomery 2050. There are a lot of different opinions. Should we have more multiple dwellings? Should we have, what's the role for single family housing? I would encourage the council to defer this so that in the election next year, we can have a robust debate about this because it's a topic that's near and dear. People have very strong opinions, and it's something for the voters to be able to weigh in on.
Thank you, Mark. And we've talked about Thrive 2050 a couple of times, and we will continue to talk about it because it does so radically change what's going on here in the county. I'm getting the wrap sign. So thank you both for being here today on this kind of gloomy Friday morning. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show for 21 this week. I'm Casey Aiken.